Ali, and welcome to the Mo'onga Project. My name is Reina Kapilani Pahulu, and I'm your host. Today we'll be discussing all things LGBTQ in the Pacific Islander community. And we are joined by the Micronesian and Polynesian communities today, which is exciting. I think first and foremost, I'd like to welcome all of our wonderful panelists. If y'all want to give a quick wave to the camera. Yes, I'm excited. Thank you all for being here. Let's see. The first question I'd like to open up the space with is, what does it mean to be LGBTQ in our communities? Would anyone like to take a stab at that?
I'll go for it.
Let's do it.
So for me, it's honestly thinking about it, it's bringing all the best parts, I think, of being Pasifika. So like being hospitable, like having a place in society, as you know, historically we've had third genders and gender diversity, as well as having the really fierce love that Pasifika people are known for, sort of shine through in terms of being LGBTQ plus and a Pasifika person at the same time. And that it's been that way ancestrally, and we continue to do that now. That's what that means to me.
I love that. Thank you, Leo. I think, would anyone want to touch on kind of like the hardships of what it's like to be in our community?
Before we do, I just want to echo a little bit more off of Leo's sentiments.
Okay.
And I think for me, what's really important to my journey is looking at it in the reverse, right? Thinking about what it means to be fa'afafine in the LGBTQ community. And it's honoring that I come from an Indigenous identity called fa'afafine and Leiti, and honoring that and sharing that part to the rest of the LGBTQ community worldwide.
I love that. Thank you, Nato. Anyone else? Stanzen, you look like you're itching to say something.
In regards to hardship, it's interesting. Fa'afafine is a label that I recently came into really taking pride in, because growing up, being more masculine and growing up, especially like in the sports community of the PI community, it wasn't something that you wanted to be in the way that it was taught to me and the way that people spoke about fa'afafine. But I am like so honored and so grateful for my journey that has brought me to being a very proud fa'afafine.
I love that. Yeah, and I think it's interesting too, kind of our relationship to language and how we are trying to associate ourselves and identify more with our more indigenous side of things, because it feels more, at least to me, it feels more at home than trying to pick up labels Westerners may have put upon us. And so even though like in Western context, I would identify as a transgender woman or person, I still feel a lot more comfortable as being Leiti. Have y'all noticed that in your languages that it's still, we have these words for who we exist as people, but we also know that they weren't the most friendly things to be associated with, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Growing up, fa'afafine was used to hurt me, right? Being called fafa was meant to cause harm and that I should feel ashamed. But it also really forced me at a very young age to make others try to see who I am and accept me for who I am. Like, you want to hurt me with this word? I'm not going to give you that power. I'm going to continue to be who I am and allow you to take that and process it in whatever way that means to you, but I'm not going to let you hurt me with that word anymore. And it's still a process to this day. in a lot of different ways, even as being openly trans in the community, because there's so much work that still needs to be done because there's so much violence and vilification of trans women and trans women of color, especially, um, that it's scary. But if not us, then who, right? And so it's really beautiful to see other folks, especially younger leaders, emerging in this arena so unafraid and fierce in coming out and, you know, being more visible. Is just such an astonishing thing to see. And so thank you all for that.
Yes, we love progress. Lillian, what are do you have terms in your language that mean queerness?
Yeah, we do, but something that I want to touch on real quick in regards to language is that for me, being a queer Pacific Islander, it's being able to show up as your whole self. And so for a lot of folks that wear multiple identities, being able to come into this one as a queer trans Pacific Islander or cutie pie, it's really interesting to play along with language because not only can we recreate or reclaim words that come to us or that have been thrust upon us, it's really interesting to see how the language evolves and how much we can start to define ourselves by creating new language and terminology.
Love that. Kimo, what was it like growing up for you as an LGBTQ person?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like I'm trying to think. I'm sorry, I'm trying to put my mind together and try to really articulate that feeling of growing up on the island. But for my experience, it was very much like growing up in the U.S. territory. So it's always like chasing after what it meant to be American. So I feel like my concept of myself coming into my queerness was very much from that like Western perspective of being queer. But now that like I feel as I've gotten older, I'm really trying to deconstruct or decolonize my idea of who I am as a Pacific Islander, as a queer Pacific Islander. And so like when I was listening to everybody talk, and I'm so like grateful and thankful for the work that's like other folks have done before us, and like really inspired by the work that's happening right now. So I was like, oh gosh, I was just writing this down and I was like, man, I think to be like queer and Pacific Islander, it's like to be hard as lava rocks or fire rocks, like fluid as the ocean, delicate as the full moon's light on a cloudy evening. I'm like, oh gosh, it's like persistent in the belief in ourselves, just like our ancestors believed in the wind to come in our sails to bring us to our islands. I was just like, I feel like that's what I'm trying to figure out more of myself as a queer Pacific Islander.
I absolutely love that. I didn't grow up in the islands. I grew up in another different kind of island. I grew up in Malaysia. My mom is Chamorro. She's from Guam, and she left from Guam to San Francisco, and then she met my dad, and then they both traveled to Malaysia, where me and my brother grew up. And like growing up, I really didn't have even a language to talk about queerness, and the only language that I had was like exported, like global, like gayness. And there are Chamorro words for gay men, not that identify as gay, but like Mam Florita means little flowers in Chamorro, is the term for gay men. And I mean, these are all things that I'm slowly learning very strangely while being away from, Guahan and being away from the territory and while being, a settler on native land. So it's all very bizarre.
Yeah, I think we all, I mean, as we are diving deeper into our roots and as queer people, we're trying to wrestle and kind of find this balance with decolonization of our identities. What does that look like for you, Lucky, as far as a Samoan?
Oh, yes. I just love everything that's been said. Decolonizing, that's a fairly new term for me. And learning to think critically about my worldview, especially growing up in the Samoan diaspora. It's been a process, and it's still a journey, right, for all of us. But yeah, kind of echoing what other people have said. I remember hearing the word fafa and fafafine growing up, in elementary, being used by other kids on the playground, other Samoan kids, or at church. and how it just like was triggering, right? It's like the equivalent of the English word faggot, you know? But it wasn't until I went on my mission, because I come from an LDS background, I went on my mission to Samoa from 2008 to 2010. When I heard the term fa'afafine, it was a lot more neutral, and I mean, and I don't want to dismiss anybody's experience who grew up in the islands, but in learning to decolonize the gender binary and realize that that's a very Western concept, and that we're a lot more polygender, I guess, right? In Pasifika communities, it's just been, I'm realizing that I'm able to be my authentic self a lot more, as I have been realizing that when I look at it from a indigenous or a Samoan perspective, it's like, I feel like, yes, there's a place for me. And historically, you know, before pre-contact with colonialism and all that. So yeah, I don't know. I feel like I'm more Samoan now than I was, now that I'm able to, like, and especially because I know the language and getting to know my culture and things like that. It's pretty cool, yeah.
Yes. Sita, you are a practicing LDS member as well. What does that look like navigating for you between queerness and your religious background?
Yeah, that's a great question. I am an active participating member in the church, and I am so gay and have been since I can remember. I'm pretty sure I will always be, and I love it. I've had a lot of similar experiences in the sense of feeling a lot of confusion and shame around, you know, certain terms and identities, and then experiencing so much joy when it comes to like embracing the identity. And a lot of it came from, yeah, my understanding of the word gay and just what it means to me. I think, yeah, for me, when I talk about being gay, I struggled a lot because I struggled a lot. I'm trying to gather my thoughts right now because I'm so nervous. But when I talk about being gay, it's my natural ability to appreciate another woman's beauty or to be sensitive to her character strengths, right? To see her potential, to want to connect and be intimate. And it was really hard for me because those are all really beautiful things, but I felt like they were wrong, or like they were, yeah, I just didn't, it was just very confusing for me. But I think in exploring and like in being willing to talk and have these conversations, it's been really helpful for me in developing a sense of self.
Yes, that's so important. And I think, you know, so many of us as adults now, we get to kind of find this pathway to self because we have more autonomy than maybe previous generations have had. I know, Gia, you wanted to talk about kind of what it's like being a queer kid growing up, and then also how we can help queer kids growing up now in educating themselves and learning to disassociate themselves from that kind of shame. I don't know. What are your thoughts on that?
It wasn't until like recently, because I started to see a lot of posts about, you know, bringing LGBTQ into schools, and people are like, oh no, that's so disgusting. And then it's like, well, they're not gonna like, you know, put up Pornhub and have like, you know, like man on man action, like, you know, if you know what I mean. It's more of like just, and to be honest, I don't know what they're going to teach the kids, but I do know that we exist and we deserve to be taught to other kids because they're part of us as well. You know what I mean? And we're human at the end of the day. And it's just, you know, because parents don't want to bring it up to their children is the reason why we have this fear, you know, of like just being who we are in public, even in like family functions, even just at home. You don't know, your neighbor might be like some freaking homophobe and just want to come and burn your house down while you're watching a movie or something. Like, you just never know. Like, that's why it's, for me, it's very important. So I haven't really had too much to think about other than just putting together like my emotions as like anger and like determination. So it's kind of like I do kind of have to sit back and think about it a little bit more, but pretty much in a nutshell, I feel like, and I think what really triggered it was seeing a lot of my family members posting stuff like that. And I was just like, really, bitch? Like I'm here. You see me, you know me. Like, it's and just I just feel like it's just very disrespectful and very inconsiderate of like me and the rest of the community. And it's just like, it just proves that we don't matter to them. And for them to teach that to our children, I don't think it's fair. Like I feel like they just, like, kids deserve to, had I learned about that a little bit, in my younger years, which is not too long ago, I would have felt more comfortable, even though I feel like I did kind of grow up comfortably a tad bit, but it would have been a little bit more better. And I feel like our parents would have been a little bit more, educated on it. And, instead of like thinking like, oh my gosh, how am I going to raise this child? Like, or it's like, we're just meant to like clean the house and take care of the old folks, when everyone gets married and goes off and lives with their families.
Right. When everybody else gets married, they assume, right?
Right. Right.
I feel like that's a common struggle too, is like we operate in that space of consumability where we aren't invited to the table if we can't bring some kind of talent or service to our families and our larger communities, which is dehumanizing as fuck. Like, if we're being completely honest, it just makes you feel like all you are is beauty or cooking or whatever you can give to them that they can take from you, but not regard you as a whole human. So
a whole person.
My mom used to say to me when I was younger, she's like, oh my gosh, what kind of lady are you? You're lazy. Like, you don't clean. You don't, she's like, the ladies that I grew up with, they're very crafty. They make necklaces and things. They wave baskets and they go sell it at, at the market. I'm like, no, girl, that's not what I'm going to do. Like, but, she used to say these things. So in my mind, like, being lady was that, being like the maid of the house. Unfortunately, they never got that kind of lady, but I mean, it's crazy.
Yeah, just some harmful things that we internalize. What other stereotypes have you perpetuated about the community, or that you've heard around the community? This is open to anyone.
Can I chime in real quick? So growing up, when other relatives obviously recognized the femininity in me, and when they talked about other older fa'afafine in our community or even within our family, I always recognized a certain level of like taboo about it, or, like, yeah, you could be like that, but, and it never sat well with me. But as I started growing up, I realized that a big part of it was because of the hypersexualization of fa'afafine and trans fans, especially. And so there's this stigma of like being associated with like the sex industry and like performative art in a sexual way, drag, performance art like that. That was like, be careful, don't tread or cross along that line. But then also like, being fa'afafine and like sometimes being tiki, like, but because that's a big part of our community, like struggling to like belong in the world, right? And looking for ways to better connect with community, but also trying to show up and say we're here and we exist. Gia, you brought up a very good point. Why can't we just exist as we are? Why do we have to be twice as anything, right? Care much more, for our family, or, bring some comedic relief to a space? Like, why can't I just be as I am in this space? But I started recognizing that early on, and it forced me to try to navigate my personal experience in a different way that was rooted deeply in like academia. To have to say that I have this trophy now, can you accept me? Like, and that was what was forced upon me growing up. Was my family said to me, if you want to be that way, you have to graduate high school first, you know, like holding that over my head as an incentive. So I felt that I always needed to overperform in many areas to finally get that level of acceptance. Luckily for me, it happened much younger than they wanted. But, you know, for every little thing, it was like, I felt it was a trade-off. Like, I brought this trophy. I had these grades. I'm going to start testing the boundaries. Are earrings now okay? Is another inch of hair growth now okay? These shorts are getting, you know, 1 inch, 2 inch higher and tighter. And, you know, testing the boundaries that way and started finding myself.
Yeah, you actually bring up two things that I think are super important. One being the ability to speak the unspoken, and then thinking about how we're negotiating our identities in the process of that. So for me, it's really important that we recognize our elders. That's kind of across the board. But for me, I really want to emphasize the importance of queer elders and the visibility of queer elders, because if I had somebody who, you know, at a younger age, I could look up to openly and ask for help, or somebody who could even help our parents' generation kind of go wrap their heads around raising queer kids, I think that would have been really, really like ultimately valuable in so many ways. And I don't know if anybody else has had the experience, but I definitely had the auntie who was living with her cousin who wasn't her cousin, but you couldn't say that they were your cousin, even though you know that like if we're not related to them, they can't be your cousin. But that whole situation, I feel like, you know, that's very much a part of that taboo, the unspoken. And if we could just get to a point where we're open and sharing that really precious part of our own families, whether it's chosen or blood family, you know, we could just have so much more beautiful acceptance of folks as opposed to tolerating people. And then the other point, just about negotiating identities, like Donato, your example was really good too. But for me growing up, I also have a queer older sister. So for me, I was like, there's no way that my parents could have two queer daughters. There's no way. And so I was constantly negotiating my identity, being like, okay, well, if I can identify this way here, do I have to identify this way here? And it was a lot of moving parts all at once before really like coming into my identity and saying like, okay, yes, I am, you know, a very, very openly pansexual Palau person. And that's something that is really, it takes a lot emotionally, physically, mentally, spiritually. It takes a lot, but I'm just happy to be able to hopefully be the queer elder that I want to have for other folks.
Thank you, Lillian. I also have a Fafafina sister that we grew up together. So we were testing all of those boundaries together and trying to see like, oh, which one will get fussy first, yeah? Or okay first about this. And, okay, she did that. I'm gonna push it a little further. So that was a very beautiful experience growing up. I also wanted to quickly add, because the topic of education was also brought up, that Senate Bill 5395 was just signed into law in March this year by Governor Inslee here in Washington State. And this helps provide a comprehensive gender and sexual education starting as early as kindergarten. And what that looks like is helping to teach kids about their bodies, like what are the appropriate areas, what are safe spaces, like here on your arms. You know, if you go past a certain place, you know, that's, you know, not a safe space that other people should go. But really, really important to teach from a very young age, right? That level of awareness to also help keep kids safe. But that's gonna look like a lot of different ways. You know, in the future, it doesn't roll out until 2022, but it's a very, very important place to start. And we hope that other areas, especially in the Pacific, can help to take up that approach to gender and sexual orientation.
I just wanted to chime in, especially about the question about what are some harmful stereotypes that I believed in myself about myself. And it was like, it was learning the difference between gender and sexual orientation. And a great example of this is like the question, when did you come out, or when did you know you were gay? And it's, my answer is always like around middle school, like high school, when I found gay porn, right? I didn't go back to straight porn, so I was like, okay, I'm gay. But I was like, what, in my teens, early teens that time? But the question that isn't asked is, when did you find out your gender identity? You know what I mean? Or your gender expression, you know? And these are things that are not necessarily, what's the word? They move together. They're separate, you know? Or, yeah, so, because I knew from a very young age that I was very feminine, you know, but gender has nothing to do with physical. I mean, you have your gender expression, but it doesn't have anything to do with sexual orientation as well, because there's a lot of fa'afafine who don't sleep with men, they sleep with women, you know, still. So, and that for me, I was like, whoa, they're fa'afafine, and I'm like, okay, there's something wrong with them. They're being oppressed as fa'afafine, but it's like, not necessarily, because their sexual orientation is not their gender identity. So that is something for me, and I'm 31 years old, right? So I just learned this difference this year, and it's a new way of looking at my experiences up until now, and it's also a new way of talking about it to people who are interested, because people do talk to me, because I'm like the one gay friend that they have in their family, or not their family, in their circle of friends, or in my family of 9 kids, I'm the one gay brother, right? And so it's like, just knowing this little difference and how that blew my mind, it really like, it was like, whoa, what else am I like perpetuating that could be harmful to not only me, but others in the community, and to those who are outside of the community wanting to learn. And so, yeah, I appreciate the thoughts that have been shared about that so far as well.
Thank you, Lucky. I think so many great points were brought up, especially about like, we have to be, even as kids, we almost have to be our own expert at advocating for ourselves and educating everyone around us when we just want to live. We don't always know all of the language. And I think that's such a convoluted question when you ask, like, how did you know this about yourself? It's like, well, it's an evolving thing, and it didn't happen at any one finite point. I just kind of am taking ownership of that today. And then also, like, who did we look up to? Because there were no queer, as far as I was growing up, there were no queer Pasifika people that I could look up to. I think the only person I can reference was Gia, who's on the call now. I remember growing up watching her stories or her videos, because they were so viral, and at least in the Polynesian community, and laughing at that, but also knowing that there was something different about her, and it was okay because she was being herself. And it makes me emotional that she's on the panel today. Thank you for being here. Because there really wasn't anyone else that I could like readily identify myself with. And so it has been this lifelong process of like unlearning and relearning, and then re-upping on different ideologies about myself. I don't know, who have y'all been able to kind of look at when growing up and think, hey, maybe that's what I could be, or like, that makes sense to me?
I can share a little bit about my kind of queer cathartic moment. So for those of you who don't know, I'm born and raised in Portland. Portland is very, very much a white city. It's more, I think Oslo, Norway is more racially diverse than Portland, Oregon, to give you kind of a sense about that. And for a long time, I struggled finding queer community in Portland, because it was either be part of the queer community and experience a lot of racism, or be part of the Pasifika community and not have that support as a queer person. So when I landed in Auckland, New Zealand to study, I was finally, for the first time in my life, surrounded by lots of queer Pasifika people. And so for me, that exposure to people who are visibly queer, people who are unapologetically queer and Pasifika at the same time, it was just a breath of fresh air to me, and so inspiring, and so motivating for me to try to find that once I returned back to Portland. So for me, that was in many ways that kind of saved my life.
I love that energy. Sita, you look like you want to say something.
Honestly, I am just taking all of this in. I love this. I love getting to know each of you and all of your stories. I feel it in the heart, and I feel this on such a real level too. When it comes to stereotypes and just, I think for me, one of the most difficult things for me to kind of navigate or wrestle with growing up, because I didn't have anybody that I felt I could identify with, I really struggled with feeling my experience was valid, not seeing it anywhere else. I really felt I had this sense of, I almost felt like I needed to find myself in other people for it to be valid. And that really, really hurt me because it was nowhere to be found where I was. I went to high school and I grew up a lot in Bakersfield, California. There's not a lot of PI people there. I grew up a lot around a lot of white people. I mean, yeah, and I love white people. And yeah, it was just a lot. It's a lot, but I feel like for me, what's been especially empowering and growing up was realizing that, yeah, that my experience was just as valid, as real as anybody else's, even if nobody else understood me, and that I didn't need anyone else to understand me to understand myself. And the more that I've been able to develop a sense of identity and of myself and see myself in all that I am, I think I see more clearly, like I understand more fully now how difficult that journey is to take, firstly. And so I feel like it's a lot easier for me to be patient with others. I think it's more clear to me now as I get older and I have such a sense of self that it's hard for other people to understand themselves. And so, and I understand that. And so I'm very, very patient with anyone who's even trying to make any effort to understand me. And that's been crucial in navigating my relationships and my identity within the PI community, because yeah, just because there hasn't been a lot of, it's just been a lot of work in creating that understanding on my part, but it's been a beautiful experience, and I just love hearing all of yours. I don't know if that answered the question, but
You're good. Yeah, I think an interesting point you brought up is about almost like this concept of grace that we are able to afford. I feel like that's a commonality in Pasifika culture as well, where Western folks, I don't know if you want to attribute that to whiteness, whatever, that's your business, but I feel like a lot of Western queer LGBTQ spaces, they're so quick to discard their families and or friends or peers or community should like one discrepancy come up, and it's like, no, fuck them, they don't call me by my right pronouns, or they don't call me by this name that I want to be called by now. Whereas like even in dealing, like I've been so fortunate that with my family, they've loved and accepted me for the most part, but again, they don't understand all of the details. And so for me as a Tongan Lady, it was not easy for me to just be like, oh yeah, F my mom because she's not going to call me Reina today, or F, she's not calling me her, she, her. And I'm also coming to the understanding that this is not even my language to fight so fervently for, to be called she, her, all of these crazy ass shit that, I don't know, it just feels so violent to really put myself on the line for things that don't even necessarily belong to me. Whether I can speak the language or not remains, is its own thing. But I feel like we do such a great job in loving our people through these transitional processes. Because it's not easy, and I don't know if it's, I don't think it's unique to our community, but I feel like, again, we do such a great job of again, loving our communities through it, whether that's our immediate families or not. And again, I feel so fortunate. I don't know if anyone has experienced the opposite, which is valid too. If y'all want to speak on that, let me know. Cool. Let's see.
I just want to say something. I was fortunate enough to grow up with one of my late uncles, auntie. I never really called her auntie. She was always just Uncle Miss Daisy. Rest in peace in Sacramento. Um, and then also, I lived in a duplex, and so my next door neighbor, which was my cousin, was 2 years older than me at the time, and also late these. So we would go outside and wear our sister's Sundays, best dress, and we would just model it in the front, and our parents knew it, and they would laugh about it and stuff. But I remember being around around Miss Daisy and just thinking it's just this feeling of just I don't know what it was. I'm sure you guys probably know what I'm talking about. Like as a kid and you're around another lady, like I used to get the same feeling when drag queens would be around, and I'm like, oh my gosh, like you're so beautiful. Like you're like, you can relate to them. But Miss Daisy, I would just when I learned that I wasn't supposed to be the way I was, is when I would kind of act like, oh, I don't want to be like Miss Daisy, but I was sitting there watching every single thing she would do, the way she would drive and turn when she would come in and make the round queque isites at our house, and how feminine she was. She was just so bossy. Like everyone in at least in South Sacramento growing up, like everyone knew Miss Daisy. Like she was such a boss. Like she made so much noise, and people loved her. She was everything. And so I was lucky enough, and I had featured on a podcast for the cultures, and I had totally forgot to mention Miss Daisy, and it was so I felt so bad because I had made it seem like I didn't grow up around ladies, but I didn't grow up around as many ladies as a lot of my Latino friends did. There's a lot of them, but and as well as my Samoan friends growing up, they had a lot of fafafines around them, but in the Tongan community, it's very um minimal, because there's just there I don't know what it is. But anyways, so yeah, so I was fortunate enough, but it's still kind of I was still ashamed to feel, to kind of try to be who I really was. But yeah, it was just nice to, because now that I'm older, I kind of feel like, oh my gosh, I'm living out Miss Daisy's legacy, or I'm not as half as crazy as she was, and as half as legendary as she was, but I think about her all the time. So I was fortunate enough to have someone that I did look up to, and I still look up to. I still feel her spirit around. Yeah, I just wanted to add
Yes, Miss Daisy.
that.
Pivoting a bit, I'd like to expand on the conversation about what are some things that we wish people in our community knew or just kind of understood without us having to always put ourselves out there about. Anyone?
I think I would just love, because we take such pride in our culture and being indigenous, but which indigenous are you claiming? Are you claiming the watered down version that we grew up learning in this through the white lens, the American lens, diaspora, or it's because I think about if our Samoan ancestors looked at the way that we see culture now, and culture is dynamic and evolves over time. I get that part, but it's before Christian contact, we were polyamorous. We were a lot more gender fluid and accepting of people who fell in the middle, fafafine, mahu, leiti. And so we were just a lot more inclusive and tolerating, but a lot of people who proclaim that they're indigenous or Samoan or whatever, and then turn around and say homophobic things, or what I mean, will say transphobic things. It's you do realize that our being a Samoan, we're actually embrace and uphold these gender identities before, so that's why I'm please, if you're going to claim and be so proud in the culture, make sure you kind of learn the deeper culture, the culture before white people took over and told us that Fafafines are, shouldn't be accepted and all these things. So that's why I was like, that's one thing that I would really love our people, especially because the world needs indigenous wisdom and knowledge.
Anyone
Teach
else?
the children. So
Go
go,
for it,
Stanson.
Stephen. You still on mute, baby.
How about now? Okay, I was gonna say that really resonates with me. A lot of times when I'm talking to other Samoans who grew up here in America, I talk about the importance of seeing something through a Samoan lens. A lot of times we try to view these things through a Western lens and it doesn't make sense. It doesn't get back to the origins of what it is. People love to shit on me for being Afakasi, and they always try to ask me, what do you know about Fa Samoa? And then they just come at me with these homophobic and transphobic things. And I'm like, you think that's representative of our culture? Like, you're speaking from a colonizer's perspective. I don't know what you're trying to get at right now. And I don't think a lot of our people realize this. Like, the most important thing that I get from our culture and our PI culture is love. We love in a way that is just so fundamentally different from the people that I've met that are outside of our communities. And there's a reason why I still claim the culture that tried to spit me out. I think it's so beautiful. And I think a lot of our people are just so capable of good. And I just want them to have that opportunity to do that and be that.
With what you said, I think about the African proverb that it takes a village to raise a child. And, that is so true within our Pasifika communities, that even if we might experience harm from some people, somehow in some way, we'll find a sense of safety within our own communities, right? Such as not every part of my upbringing was safe or welcoming, but I knew that there were people in my corner that I could feel safe with, but also advocated for me to live more authentically, that I could express myself in all the ways that I wanted to, just because they made it safe for me to do so. So that's really beautiful. Thank you.
Thank you, Nato. I think another point of contention or kind of confusion is our how we navigate religion and spirituality. I feel like it's been utilized as a tool of colonization, frankly, but also on deeper levels, especially concerning our queerness as queer people, which sucks because, Stanton, you talked about this culture that kind of chews you up and spits you out. And it's unfortunate because we are trying so hard to love on all of ourselves, and that is such an integral part is our indigenous roots. And it's become largely tied with Western theology and things without really affording any of us that same grace that we talk about. There's this love and things, but we are the exception and we are ousted from the community. I don't know, how are people finding that balance with again, religion and piety?
I haven't found it.
Amen, right? That was honestly going to be what I wanted to say as well. I do have a lot, I feel like I could say about it just because I'm navigating that space myself, but it really is such a process. And it's difficult because for me personally, my faith in God and my understanding of him and what that means to me is just as fundamental and crucial to my identity as my gayness. And the way that I view it, I think because I had to focus so much on my own personal narrative, it's allowed me to explore these identities in ways that have helped me personally come to a place where I feel wholehearted, not perfect, or not not that I completely understand myself in all that I am either, but for me personally, my gayness and my spirituality and my faith, my religion, the way that I practice it, they're not at opposite ends for me personally. I personally believe that my gayness is a gift of God. It's a gift of love, and I think that that this is the kind of love that I feel called, like Stenson shared, to share with our people as well, to increase that. I think that's what it's really all about. I feel very blessed in all of these facets. Not that it's been easy, or that I've again like navigated it or figured it out, but I know that my experience with it as well is very unique to myself. Like it's very, yeah, it's not universal, but I'm interested in hearing everybody else's experience with that as well.
Well, I was born and raised in the Baha'i faith. My mom was, she joined the Baha'i faith back in Tonga when she was a teenager. So, so by the time she had us, it was just very strong. And growing up in the Baha'i faith was interesting. When I say interesting, it's in a good way, because I didn't realize that in Christian churches that they would really like ridicule being feminine, boys being feminine, or girls being tomboys, or like any of that, because in the growing up in the Baha'i communities, it wasn't so like, I guess it wasn't that big of a deal. Like, that wasn't the focus. There's way more that needs to be dealt with in this world, and that needs to be focused on, other than someone's sexuality. And that goes back to just being, that is your relationship with God. That has nothing to do with the whole community. That ain't nobody's business. But there are laws. There are laws that come with the Baha'i faith, and I have to follow those laws. But like, I wasn't ever told to like, oh, you're walking to, feminine, or I don't know, stop waving your hands like that. Like, I'm trying to think of like all the gay stuff that like, that when I would go to like the Tongan community, I would hear like, people, that's when I started to feel like, oh my gosh, this is wrong, because even in school, like I had so many girlfriends, and a lot of the guys there were their like brothers, and so they didn't really care, because I was like their sister's best friend. So I never really had any of that in school. And then and also when I would go to like we don't have church, so like we don't, our Sundays are just a regular day to us, but we have like a 19-day feast. So I would go to feast, and I would go to events and youth stuff, and I would never feel like I was too gay or too feminine. We don't have conversion camps or, things like that. So it didn't exist in my mind until I would see it in movies and hear. And then, it wasn't until recently that I realized that like a lot of our people, and a lot of like, even the minorities here in America, we're being taught like the white Christian way. And that's why we're having a hard time. That's why we're all trying to like decolonize, we're all trying to do the work to kind of get our people to realize that like the Jesus that and the God that you were taught is not, it's, I don't know how to say it. You guys know what I mean though, but like, they were taught, the white Jesus, and they were taught by white Christians who just, I don't know, they just didn't like gay people, or, I'm sure they were all gay. Come on, like, we all know. But yeah, growing up in the faith, I didn't really have a back and forth. I didn't feel like, oh, God is against me. And it wasn't until probably like in my early 20s when I had realized that like, and at that time I didn't identify, I didn't know that there was such thing as transgender. So I still felt like I was like a gay boy. And I just felt like, oh my gosh, there's no like practicing of you know, sexual acts between a man and a man or a woman and woman. And I was just like, so what the fuck am I supposed to do? Like masturbate for the rest of my life? Like, and you know, even touching my man parts down there is like very disgusting to me. So it's like now I'm just like, what the fuck am I gonna do? You know what I mean? So it's like, but it wasn't until I started to realize like, bitch, there's so much more to life. There is so much more that God has given you than to just, you know, freaking relieve your horny urges. You know what I mean? And so, you know, I was able to like kind of take myself out of that like depression that I was in for like probably like 3 weeks or whatever. And, you know, it wasn't until I started to really fully learn transgender, learn what transgender was because I don't know, I guess I just was never taught it. But yeah, my relationship with God is very strong. It's very, very strong. I don't know if I just call myself a religious person, but like I'm definitely a firm believer and a strong um soldier of God. That was so ugly, but yeah, anyway. Shut me up. Come on,
I love
somebody
it.
continue.
There you go again, affording yourself that grace, you know?
Yes.
Um,
Leo?
Well, I was gonna say that religion and all that like has a really like different vibe for me because my mom converted to Catholicism because my dad is Palangi and his whole family's Catholic. So she converted. She's never really been really strong in it. So that part of it never really came into play for me. For me, it's reaching back to learn more about indigenous Samoan religion because so much of modern Samoa is so intertwined with Christianity that like even the story about Nafanua and how she was a war goddess that gave Samoa the Samoan government model. The end of her story is her having a prophecy that missionaries or like another god is going to come and to accept it. And I remember the first time I heard that, I was like, that can't be right. Like, why would she predict that just to say, oh yeah, let it go? Samoans are so proud. Like, that doesn't make any sense. Like, it just, I was like, that can't be right. Like, the Palangi people like probably added that in there to make it easier to go down. So for me, it's wanting to always reach back to that and bring the best of indigenous religion to us now. Like a big thing for me being non-binary is that I've read several times that the overarching, you know, God talanoa langi is neither a man or a woman. And I've been sweating this whole time trying not to cry, and here we go. So Cancer Sun, here we go. So like for me when I read that, I was like, I'm a god? What? So it's just like trying to explain stuff like that, like about Nafanua, about Tangaloa Langi to like my mom or to my aunt and uncle, who my uncle was like a deacon in the church. When my uncle knows like about all of the old stories and like about our family and feeling like because I'm non-binary and queer that I don't have access to that. So my relationship with religion is really hard since I feel like I'm the black sheep in the family. And so hearing other people's stories with like LDS or like Ifakasa, like all those other like Christian religions, like I can understand how maybe, you know, Atua or God, like the Christian version of God might be kind of similar to like the indigenous version of God. I can see that. But then when it comes to not like just abandoning like everything else in favor of settler colonialism and Christianity, like that's what really gets it for me. And it really makes me sad to think about like in the future if it dies off with like us and our parents, like that's part of the culture. Like you get the culture in knowing about gods and how they operated in everybody's life, and how Samoans were seen as like these godless people because we didn't have shrines and like statues and all these things. And so if it just fritters away, and to get even more serious, like with climate change, with the land literally, you know, getting drowned out, like it's just gonna be gone. And my mom has always told me, and wanting to learn more about Samoan culture and their religion and everything else, I remember I was in college and I was majoring in creative writing at first, and then I switched to learning about like majoring in Pacific Islander studies. And I was asking about the language one day, and she just turned around and she blew up at me. She was like, "Why the hell do you want to learn about this at all? It's just gonna die. Like, what's the point? You should learn English. That's where it's gonna be. So you want to learn about all this stuff is nonsense." So I think about that whenever I think about trying to decolonize and trying to reach, like I said before, like reach back into the past and keep it alive. Because if my mom already thinks it's gone, it might as well be, unless, you know, like people who want to decolonize and learn that language keep it alive and do their part to learn. So that's where I'm at.
Thank you so much, Neil, for sharing. That was really beautiful. And, you know, God is all of us, you know, in that way. Like God, well, and in my opinion, I don't feel like God is gendered, you know. My relationship with religion has been very bumpy. I understand the need and the importance of having faith, right? Because I've been granted faith in so many ways. Otherwise, I wouldn't be here today. But I remember distinctly, I was baptized Catholic. I grew up in the Catholic Church. Up until a certain age, my parents stopped mandating us to go to church every Sunday. They just got to the point where, like, if you feel you need to go to church, come with us to church. Otherwise, you're gonna make gongay. So okay, I'll stay home and make gongay. But I remember distinctly in high school, I had went with a friend to their church, and I was already transitioning socially and with as far as how I dress. I was dressed in a puletasi, and as a guest in that church, there was a moment where the faifeau, or the pastor, was giving their sermon, that sermon turned into an attack on me, a personal attack about this Fa'afafine person being in this church. And it was so hurtful when, you know, they were trying to preach about how it was an obvious attack on me and how I'm wrong, you know, all this and that. And there was really a point during that sermon where everyone in the church turned around and like veered at me. And I felt so unsafe. I wanted to cry deep down. My friend reached over and like squeezed my hand. She didn't even know how to react because she was like, "I brought you as my guest and this happened." It was very scary. So it's been a struggle, but like today, like how I feel about religion is that I don't believe so much or buy into Christianity so much anymore that I used to. But I lead with love, and that is the true meaning and like what the Bible is trying to teach us, right? And the message of Christ, and it's what we should show in every aspect of our lives. And that's what I hold on to. And that's how I carry on with, yeah. Thanks, sorry, I'll shut up.
No, thank you for sharing, because that just reminds me of some of my own bumpy Christianity moments. So, first of all, I was not raised religious or in a church whatsoever. I feel really lucky that my parents were pretty much, their philosophy on faith with us was, you go, you find what works for you, we'll support it 100%. And so I feel really lucky that I didn't have any kind of, faith imposed on me or anything. But I did have a bit of rebellious phase when I was, I want to say when I was in middle school, early high school, where I decided, you know what, I do want to go to church with our extended relatives who have always been telling us that we're going to hell for not going to church. But I remember the very, very last time that I chose to walk into a church for a service with my extended family. There was a guest pastor who is, very good at riling up the crowd, getting everybody like to pray and everything. And he said, "We're going to pray for all the sinners that they repent. We're going to pray for all the folks who are, living impoverished so that we can help them. And we're going to pray that we kill all the homosexuals." And at that moment, I was like, I'm never coming here again. Ever. I'm not doing it. And so that was the very end of me walking into a church willingly for a service. But over the years, I've come to really value my connection to the ancestors. I don't know if you can see my shirt, but it says "Think like an ancestor, not a colonizer." Shout out to Decolonize Pacific for this shirt. But again, I've really tried to reconnect with my ancestors on a deeper level, because at the end of the day, what I know for sure is truth and cannot be, taken from me, is that the blood in my veins, it's my ancestors. That's how they are alive in me. And so for me, it's been a really interesting journey to kind of go from not having really any kind of structured faith to trying organized religion and realizing it does not fit me at all, and then going back to really honoring the ancestors, because there is a quote by Papa Mau, really cool Micronesian navigator, and he said, "If I have faith, it is because I believe in my ancestors." And so that's something that I really keep with me at all times, because that's how I center myself. That's how I get back to my own culture.
Wow, that was amazing, and I thank you for sharing, Lillian. And I feel like in reflecting like my journey with like religion, I feel like it's so similar to how you were talking about yours. For me, like growing up on Saipan, it's part of the Marianas. It's a very like Catholic place, and my mom is from the island of Palau, and she grew up in a very like evangelical Protestant from like German administration. So she was born into that, definitely grew up in it. And so when I think about growing up on the island, for me, I think myself as like, I grew up religious adjacent. I was right next to it, never really a part of it. I think that like on weekdays, I was Catholic. On weekends, I was Protestant, because then I went to church with my mom's side. So I was in the the Protestant churches of the other Palauans. And I just felt like being in like the pews, as a queer person trying to figure out religion, especially like Christianity, I feel like I was also always chasing love that they were always talking about. And they talked about this like unconditional love that God gives folks. And I was like, dang, that's so beautiful. But then as a queer person, instead of being given that love or fed that love, I was given like sin, and it was like being sinful in myself, and guilt, and that like queer desire that I had in me, or that my queer identity. So there was a lot of resentment that I ended up building as I got older, to feel so betrayed by this like community that so embraces love religiously and so like communally with the village and each other, that man, religion was just such a betrayal for me. But then I feel like I've like flipped it around and started like growing connections to the elements, to the earth. And so that's been, yeah, like my like 180 for me has just been like, wow, like the moon makes sense to me, and how it like brings in the tide and feeds people. The sun makes sense, it's warmth that gives gives energy to our plants and feeds me. So I'm like, wow, that for me has been my journey in spirituality that has given me the love that religion hasn't given me, organized religion anyways.
A lot of those stories are also, or that same narrative that we're discussing, is also captured in Ladies in Waiting. It's a documentary by Joe Wilson and Hinale Wangkalu, featuring Joey Mataele. It's very beautiful. Folks that are tuning in or watching, please check that out. It's also available on YouTube and Prime.
Yes, so we're coming up on our hour, and we know as queer people, or however you identify, that even though we're under this LGBTQ identity umbrella, it's still very nuanced per identity. Like transgender isn't always the same thing as being a cis heterosexual or cis gay person. And so I think to wrap up, if we could just quickly go around and any advice that you would give to your younger self or younger queer people coming up. I'll go ahead and popcorn it around. Let's start with Lucky and then Gia, and we'll keep going from there.
My younger self was a mess and didn't understand logic. Like, so saying words to somebody who's very much more of like a feeler, I would have just hugged him and be like, we are going to get through this. Hang in there. It gets better. See, yeah, just hang in there, because I don't want to be like, go read a book or try to find your tribe. Just hang in there. And your older self is waiting for you. All right, it's a process, but yeah, I would just hug him and tell him I love him. And the young LGBT youth, especially in the Pasifika communities, you are beautiful. There's nothing wrong with you. All right. And hopefully, like kind of like what Lillian and everyone else here said, I hope to be that queer elder for those who are up and coming to look up to and be like, it is okay for me to wear makeup if I'm a boy, or if I'm a girl, it's okay for me to get attracted to another girl, you know? So yeah, we're here, we're queer, we ain't going nowhere, but yeah. Oh, popcorn it to, let's go Stanson. Oh, sorry. Is that what we're doing? Or let me just.
You're good.
Whoever wants to take the mic.
It's Gia's turn.
Yes, let's go, Gia.
Okay. Well, I mean, I just would tell my younger self that, like, the feelings that you feel are very much valid, and don't eat too much. I'm serious though, don't eat too much, because it's gonna mess up how you want to look when you're older. But you're gonna hit a rough patch in your teenage years, and I've always felt that the younger me has always been a seeker, and I've always been searching, and I'm still searching, but that's one thing that I would tell myself is to continue down that path of seeking, and you will find yourself. Or at least halfway, half of yourself. Oh gosh, the upper half. I'm kidding. And you're very much loved, and don't forget that your family has always been there for you, whether you felt they didn't understand you or not. And to just don't put people down. You're gonna fight a lot, but don't put people down just to make yourself feel better, because you are that bitch.
Thank you, Gia. Let's go to Kevin, and then Sita, and then Kimo.
Yeah. My younger self, a lot of internalized homophobia. Did a lot of stupid things to myself. I guess the one big advice, and I feel like so much wisdom has already been shared, I would probably tell my younger self that love is not compliance, and that my hopes and my desires and my vision matters too.
Love that. Love everything that has been said so much. This has been amazing. I think for me, the one thing I would tell my younger self is just to love Sipa and be nice to Sipa, even when you don't understand her. It's okay to not have all the answers, and that some of the greatest gifts and of love are the very things that scare that scare me the most, or used to scare me the most, and that it's in it being willing to explore all of those like face those scary things that that joy is found. And so I would just tell her it's okay. It's scary, but it's okay, and you're loved.
Oof, yeah, I feel like I was trying to think of something short and quick and simple to myself, like, hey, smile, you got this. I feel like, oh gosh, myself, I'd probably tell myself to slow down a lot more. Like love myself so much more than I ever thought I could give myself more love. Especially like feel like growing up in the absence of it in myself, and just like really fully slow it down to hug yourself more often, like the ocean when I was swimming would hug me. Um, so definitely just try to fill myself up more, um, because life is gonna be fucking wild. So yeah.
So for me, a big thing would be that for my younger self, that my passion and my saltwater tears and all the love that I feel is it's not too much, and it's also enough. And that all that love and passion and feeling that I feel, it overflows, and that's okay. And that when it overflows, I don't have to give it away. I can give it to myself.
Ooh, what can I say to my younger self? Probably first and foremost, it is not a phase, and that's okay. You've got this. um, there's just so much I could say, but I guess to sum it up, the sacred is in you, and you are the sacred. You're gonna get through this. As long as there's air in your lungs, you can still make your shit happen. And no matter what you think, you're probably not gonna be ready for 2020, and that's okay too.
Okay, yeah, let's round it off to Nato and then Stanton to finish us off.
Okay. My advice to my younger self would be, don't do anything differently. Everything happened to you that needed to happen. Every connection you made needed to happen for all of the right reasons. And it's all going to be worth it. And invest in Zoom stock. Thank you.
Okay, I don't know how I'm supposed to follow that, but here we go. My biggest piece of advice that I would give my younger self is to quit poking and prodding. You know, you're gonna express feminine tendencies. This is something that I've actually been unpacking a lot lately with my younger self, is give yourself room to be feminine. Just because you enjoy feminine things, it doesn't mean anything. So that's wonderful, that's beautiful. And what, you know? And it would also be to keep talking to God. I stopped talking because I didn't think that God was listening, but God was listening. God was just like, shut the hell up, you're gonna be gay. Like, and it's beautiful. It's beautiful and it's worthy of love. And so are you. So.
Yes, thank you so much. Sorry if you hear vacuuming in the background. I don't know why my family thinks now is the time. But advice to myself, younger self, I would say, bitch, get ready, because it's about to get fucking hard. But it's also going to be amazing as fuck, because look at what we get to do today. Like, this is, if younger me could have seen this, I probably, like, would have cried and died from in awe. But yeah, I just feel so fortunate to be here with you all, and I'm thankful that y'all would take the time to share space with me. And I can only imagine the young queer LGBT Fafa ladies that are coming up who might see this and feel loved and affirmed by a conversation like this, because I didn't get this, and I feel fortunate that we get to be a part of the generation that gives this to people. And so, yeah, that has been a show. I'm so grateful for y'all. Please like and subscribe, all of the things. It's so weird to say after such an emotional journey with y'all, but yeah, thank y'all, bye.